In the spring of 1959, workers at an aircraft plant outside Toronto were handed cutting torches and given an order that made no sense. The machines they were told to destroy were not captured enemy weapons. They were the fastest, most advanced interceptors on the planet. And the men holding the torches had built them with their own hands. Every country destroys its enemy's weapons. That is what war is. But the 5 machines in this video were never beaten by an enemy. Each one worked. Each one was years ahead of anything flying against it. And each one was executed by the same government that paid for it. A fighter that touched Mach 1.98, cut into scrap with its blueprints ordered burned. A supersonic secret that one country canceled and handed to a rival, who used it to claim the biggest prize in aviation history. And a spaceplane that flew a flawless mission to orbit, landed itself in a crosswind without a single human touching the controls, and was then left under a rotting roof until the roof came down. That last story has a body count, and we will get to it. 5 machines, 4 governments, 1 pattern. And the real reason is never the one printed in the press release. October 4th, 1957. 12,000 people gathered at Malton, Ontario to watch Avro Canada roll out the Arrow, a white, delta-winged interceptor that looked like it had arrived from a different decade. That very same day, on the other side of the world, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. The Arrow was upstaged by the missile age on the morning it was born, and that coincidence would eventually be used to kill it. On March 25th, 1958, test pilot Janusz Zurakovsky took the first Arrow into the sky. It went supersonic on its 3rd flight. On its 7th, it passed 1,000 miles per hour while still climbing. Flying on borrowed American engines, because its own were not ready, the Arrow reached Mach 1.9 in level flight and recorded a top mark of 1.98. It carried one of the first fly-by-wire control systems ever flown on any aircraft. And the engine actually designed for it, the Canadian-built Iroquois, described at the time as perhaps the most powerful jet engine in the world, was already installed in airframe number 6, waiting for taxi tests. In other words, the plane that touched Mach 2 was flying on spare parts. Then came Friday, February 20th, 1959. Prime Minister John Diefenbaker rose in the House of Commons and killed the program in a single announcement. No warning to the company, no wind down. That same afternoon, more than 14,000 Avro workers lost their jobs, and thousands more were cut loose across 650 subcontractors. Canadians still call it Black Friday. The official reason was money. Costs had reached $1.1 billion, and Ottawa declared that the future belonged to missiles, not interceptors. What happened next is the part no budget can explain. 2 months later, the order came down to destroy everything. All 5 flying Arrows. The 6th airframe with its Iroquois engines. The tooling, the assembly line, the drawings, and the data. Torches went through machines that had been the pride of a nation, and the government made certain nothing could ever be restarted. One senior draftsman named Ken Barnes was ordered to burn the blueprints. Instead, he took them home and hid them in his basement, where they stayed secret for more than 60 years. And the replacement for the world's most advanced interceptor? Canada. Bought American Bomark missiles that never lived up to their promises, then went shopping for second-hand American Voodoo fighters to plug the hole. They scrapped tomorrow, then bought yesterday, used. NASA recruiters were dialing Ontario phone numbers within weeks. Avro engineers were interviewed on a Friday and held job offers by Saturday. 25 of them joined NASA's Space Task Group, a number that grew to 32, and one of them, Jim Chamberlain, went on to lead the design of the Gemini spacecraft. The country that burned the Arrow watched the Arrow's own designers help put men on the moon, wearing another nation's badge. And if destroying your own masterpiece sounds bad, the British government found a way to do something worse. It gave the masterpiece away. In 1943, with the war still raging, Britain quietly issued one of the most ambitious specifications in aviation history. Build an aircraft capable of 1,000 miles per hour at 36,000 feet. The contract went to a small firm called Miles Aircraft, and the result was the M52, a bullet-shaped machine with razor-thin wings and one solution nobody else on Earth had. Near the speed of sound, shock waves freeze a conventional tail's hinged elevators, and the pilot loses control. That is what was killing men in high-speed dives. The Miles answer was radical. Throw away the hinged elevator and pivot the entire tailplane as a single piece. The all-moving tail. It was the key that would unlock supersonic flight. In 1944, London signed an information sharing agreement with Washington. Engineers from the Bell Aircraft Corporation walked through the Miles factory and were shown everything. The designs, the data, the tail, the return visit, where British engineers would examine American research, was cancelled and never rescheduled. Britain had paid its half of the bargain and received nothing back. Then, in February 1946, with the prototype well advanced, the Ministry of Supply cancelled the M52 outright. The official reasons were post-war austerity and safety, the belief that firing a man through the sound barrier was too dangerous to attempt. 20 months later, on October 14, 1947, Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in the Bell X-1, and when the X-1 had slammed into the same frozen elevator problem during testing, the fix that saved the program was control through a moving tailplane, the same principle the M52 had carried from the start. Here is the detail that stings most. In October 1948, Britain launched an unmanned rocket-powered model of the M52 at 3/10 scale. It punched through the sound barrier and reached Mach 1.38 in stable, level flight. The design had worked all along. Britain canceled the airplane, proved it anyway, and watched another flag collect the greatest trophy in aviation, with British homework in its pocket. A cancellation by memo is at least quiet. What Britain did to its next great aircraft 20 years later looked less like a cancellation and more like an execution. And this time, the government paid twice for the privilege. By the early 1960s, Soviet radar and missiles had turned high-altitude bombing into a death sentence. So Britain designed a machine to fly underneath the problem. The TSR-2 was built to scream across enemy territory at treetop height, faster than sound, hugging the terrain below radar coverage. On September 27, 1964, test pilot Roland Beaumont took it up for the first time, and the aircraft proved even better than its paperwork. On its 14th flight, in February 1965, the TSR-2 went supersonic using afterburner on only one engine, because the other engine's afterburner was broken, and it still pulled away from the English Electric Lightning, flying alongside as chase. A crippled prototype outran one of the fastest interceptors on the planet. 6 weeks later, it was dead. On April 6, 1965, Budget Day, the new Labour government announced the cancellation inside the budget speech itself, folded between tax measures, after roughly £195 million had already been spent. Then came the orders that still anger British engineers today. The production jigs and tooling were broken up so the aircraft could never be resurrected, and the completed airframes were hauled to the Shoeburyness Range and used as gunnery targets. Britain did not simply cancel the TSR-2, it shot the survivors. The replacement was supposed to be the American F-111, bought off the shelf to save money. In January 1968, a currency crisis forced Britain to cancel that order too, and pay cancellation fees to Washington for aircraft that never arrived. Add it all up, and Britain paid for 2 strike aircraft and took delivery of 0. Only 2 TSR-2 airframes escaped the scrap order, and they sit in museums today as the last evidence of what was destroyed. Every machine in this story so far ended as scrap metal. The next one ends differently. It ends with an old man in a wheelchair, a classified room, and a single sentence written on a notepad. Jack Northrop had been obsessed with one idea since the 1920s, an aircraft that was nothing but wing, no fuselage, no tail, no part of the machine that did not produce lift. In 1947, his company converted its giant propeller-driven flying wing bomber into the jet-powered YB-49, a boomerang of aluminum spanning 172 feet. And in October, it lifted off over the Mojave Desert. Then something strange happened during test flights along the Pacific coast. The early warning radar station at Half Moon Bay reported that it could not detect the flying wing until the aircraft was almost directly overhead. In 1947, nobody had a word for that. The observation was simply logged and filed away. The program was not charmed. On June 5, 1948, the second prototype broke apart in flight, killing all 5 men aboard, including Captain Glenn Edwards, whose name is now on Edwards Air Force Base. And the Air Force had honest complaints. Converting to jets had nearly halved the aircraft's range, and there were real doubts about it as a stable bombing platform. Reasonable grounds, perhaps, to pick the rival B-36 instead. Which is what happened, with the B-36 order swelling from 95 aircraft to 384, while the Flying Wings production contract quietly died. But what followed was not reasonable. In 1950, every remaining Flying Wing airframe was ordered destroyed. Portable smelters were rolled onto Northrop's facility in Hawthorne, California, and the aircraft were cut apart and melted down in plain sight of the people who built them. The Smithsonian asked the Air Force to donate just one flying wing for preservation. The Secretary of the Air Force, Stuart Symington, refused. Jack Northrop stayed silent for 30 years. Then, in a taped interview in 1979, near the end of his life, he finally said it out loud. He claimed Symington had pressured him to merge his company with a rival on terms Northrop called grossly unfair, and that when he refused, every Flying Wing contract was canceled. Congress investigated. Symington denied everything. Nothing was ever proven. Then, in April 1980, 2 men from the company he founded visited Jack Northrop at home. He was 84 years old, in a wheelchair, unable to speak. They showed him a classified model of a bomber the Air Force was secretly developing. It was a flying wing. Its span was 172 feet, exactly the same as his YB-49. The old man reached for a pad of paper and wrote one sentence. "I know why God has kept me alive for the past 25 years. He died 10 months later." The B-2 Spirit flew in 1989, shaped by test data from the very wings they had melted, and invisible to radar for reasons first noticed at Half Moon Bay in 1947. The Air Force never rejected the flying wing. It rejected the man, destroyed the evidence, and kept the idea for later. 4 machines, 4 signatures. The last machine on this list was never killed by a signature at all. It was killed by the death of its own country. And its ending is the darkest thing in this video. 3 in the morning, November 15th, 1988, Baikonur Cosmodrome. Through low cloud, the most powerful rocket the Soviet Union ever flew lifted a white spaceplane called Buran toward orbit. There was no crew aboard. There was not even a life support system installed. Buran circled the Earth twice, covering more than 83,000 kilometers. Then came home and did something no spacecraft of its kind has done before or since. It flew its own re-entry, its own approach, and its own landing in a crosswind of more than 60 kilometers per hour and rolled to a stop just 3 meters off the runway centerline with 1980s computers. It came back missing only 8 of its 38,000 heat shield tiles. On its very first flight, the Soviet shuttle had nailed a performance the Americans spent years chasing. It never flew again. Buran was the largest and most expensive program in Soviet space history. 20 billion rubles, more than 1,000 enterprises across the Union. And within 3 years, the country that built it ceased to exist. The second flight was canceled, then the third, and in June 1993, the program was formally terminated. Engineers who had written the most advanced automated flight software on Earth drifted away to write code for banks. The orbiter itself was parked inside the giant assembly building at Site 112, stacked on top of a mock-up booster, and forgotten. The building was never properly maintained. Its roof insulation soaked up rain year after year, growing heavier above the spaceplane below. On May 12, 2002, while a crew was finally working to repair that roof, it collapsed. 8 workers were killed. And underneath the rubble, the only spaceplane in history to fly to orbit and land itself was crushed beyond saving. The one government on this list that never signed a destruction order destroyed its machine anyway. It simply used neglect instead of torches. And it took 8 men with it. Look at the pattern across all 5. Not one of these machines was killed by its performance. They were killed by budgets, by elections, by a feud between companies, by a minister with a speech to give. And every time, the tell is the same. These governments did not just cancel, they erased. Torches in Toronto, smelters in California, gunnery targets in Essex. A museum told no. You do not erase a failure. Failures get left to rust as warnings. You erase evidence. And the only thing these 5 machines were evidence of is that somebody powerful got it wrong. Somewhere in Ontario, a stack of forbidden blueprints spent 60 years in a basement because one draftsman decided history deserved a copy. That is how close we came to never knowing any of this. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe, because this is exactly what we do here. The real verdict on the machine's history would rather forget. I will see you in the next one.